Sure. So I appreciate all of you, first of all, for welcoming me, for the opportunity to just share a little bit of my experience as it comes to using fixed fee pricing as a model to build your firm around. And definitely appreciate y'all sharing a little bit about your personal backgrounds in terms of how you came to the point of being interested in starting your own firm. I don't remember whether or not there are slides in here or whether or not there's a slide in here that's like meant for me to introduce myself. So I'll just do it now. And if there is one, I'll skip it over when we get to it. But for me, I decided to start my own firm in 2019, June of 2019. And I think I can definitely relate to what you were saying, Jared, in terms of my wife. I look at it more like she's my business partner. But yeah, like, in terms of making sure that, you're building something that's going to be able to sustain and help you build an overall lifestyle. I came to the decision to launch my own firm when I knew that she was going to be done with medical school. And I did the math in my head and I was like, if I don't make anything this first year, we'll still have a roof over our heads. So how do you feel about that, honey? And to my surprise, she was okay with me going out on my own and launching my own firm. And 4 years later, we're still here, and it's been a lot of bumps and bruises along the way. A lot to learn. I was talking with someone else who was interested in starting their own firm a few weeks ago, who was like, how do you know when you're ready? And I was like, you probably won't know until you're like a couple years in. Um, and, so to some extent, there are just some things that you're just not going to know until you've had the experience. But I think that it's great that y'all are a part of ILPI because, Mark knows so much. He knows so many people. And he's got access and he's going to give y'all the access to resources that are going to be super helpful in terms of getting your practice off on the right foot. So really, I just want to run through my slides and really just kind of talk with y'all about building a firm that's based around fixed fee pricing and trying to ditch the billable hour. So we'll get into that. And like, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts as we're moving through it, we're a small group, so just feel free to jump right in. So really, obviously the topic for my 1 hour with y'all today is fixed fee pricing, but I think bigger picture than that, it's really talking about the future of law and the future of how we deliver services. The legal profession really hasn't changed a whole lot in the past, half a century. We're still doing things in much the same way that we've been doing for decades. And ultimately that's leaving gaps, I think, in a lot of different spaces within the legal industry, all the way up from, your large Fortune 500 companies who are looking at, working with alternative legal service providers, all the way down to, your average everyday person who is just looking to deal with any sort of everyday legal issue that folks encounter. And so one of the things that I think really kind of gets in the way of our ability to really kind of meet those needs that folks have and really delight our clients can often be the billable hour, right? So we are probably all familiar with the billable hour, and I'll kind of skip through the learning objectives. Oh, there was a slide about me, right? So we're probably all at least somewhat familiar with the billable hour in terms of like what it is, what it means, how it relates to how lawyers typically practice, right? So lawyers typically will bill their clients based upon time, right? So how much time it takes them to uh, perform a certain task, provide a certain solution, whatever the case may be. Lawyers are typically billing for their time, the time that they spend providing those services. oftentimes in 6 minute increments, but those increments may differ from firm to firm or person to person. And, there's a reason for that, right? So I think for lawyers, it's definitely, there are some benefits to the billable hour. One, it's less risky for the attorney in terms of, if you're billing for your time, that every minute that you spend is something that you can ultimately get paid for. So regardless of the outcome, you know that you're getting paid for the work that you're putting in. The billable hour is also easy to measure, right? So in terms of, what you're actually doing or what you're providing, it's very easy to measure time. Whereas, especially when you're doing work that's litigation related, or where the outcome is in some way dependent upon a third party, it can be really difficult there to kind of, measure the outcome or the output or the value of what you're providing at times. And then also the billable hour is familiar to attorneys, right? And so, most of this presentation is going to be talking about moving away from the billable hour, but I do want to kind of start by recognizing the fact that there are advantages to the billable hour for the legal profession and for lawyers, right? But of course, on the flip side, there are drawbacks. And, the drawbacks, I think, really relate to one, the relationship that it can create between an attorney and their client, right? In a lot of ways, the billable hour can put us in a sort of conflict in terms of what's best for our bottom line and what's best for the client. And I know that this is something in particular that I've experienced when I first went out on my own. I was sort of more of a general practitioner. I now focus on working with entrepreneurs, but I was more of a general practitioner doing a lot of different, basically anything that came through the door, to be honest. And I took a couple of family law related matters. And I remember one in particular being a custody matter, where my client really just wanted to get it over with, right? Like wanted to solve whatever issues that were going on. They were willing to be reasonable. And I remember trying my hardest to reach out and get in touch with the lawyer on the other side. And it was like crickets. I remember in one circumstance spending like an hour and a half drafting an email, like super well crafted. I don't think I've ever written a piece of anything that was like that good before. And I'm like, this lawyer has to respond to this. And nothing, crickets. And in talking with other folks who practice in family law, that's something that isn't too uncommon, right? There's a benefit to letting things move forward for attorneys if it means another court appearance or another opportunity to bill for a half hour consultation or whatever the case may be, right? So not saying that that's something that all attorneys do, and I would assume that it's the minority. Um, However, there is that potential conflict there for attorneys in terms of if you're billing by the hour, your client wants it to be over faster, but you get paid more the longer it goes on, right? So puts can put lawyers and clients at odds. Also, with the billable hour, it really limits our ability to scale. And the only way that you can really increase what you can make if you're billing by the hour, obviously, is by billing more time or increasing your prices, right? Whereas when we talk a little bit more about fixed fee, there are other ways that you can sort of scale, but you only have 24 hours in a day, right? So you can bill more hours, but only to a certain extent, right? At a certain point, like you have to make space and time for other things. So at a certain point, no matter how much you bill, you're going to run out of hours and time to bill, and then you're also talking about cutting into time that goes towards your well-being, right?
Hey,
So
Zane, I'm
yeah.
sorry, just to interrupt. Just it's a funny story, but it's more sad. But I vividly remember about 25 years ago, an attorney, I think he was ultimately arrested. I think he spent some jail time, but he certainly lost his law license, who did bill more than 24 hours in a day. So to be clear, that's unethical and illegal. And it's a sad story. This guy, he was a Raleigh attorney.
Wow.
And some people try to do that, and it's not a good thing to do. It's you'll get in trouble if you do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I was assuming that we were all, talking about things that you could do legally to bill more. So yeah, yeah, I didn't even think that that would even be something that someone would try to do, but um that's crazy. Thank you, Mark. Um when we talk about switching from the billable hour or considering building a practice around a fixed fee pricing model rather than around the billable hour, first of all, we want to kind of figure out, like, what are we talking about? What does this look like? So really, fixed fee pricing just refers to the price of legal services, whatever that service is, being agreed upon prior to their delivery, right? So the overall price, right? So I am drafting this contract for X amount of dollars, or I will handle this hearing for however much, right? And so examples might include charging for an estimated number of hours, productized legal services, right? So something where maybe you are creating something that someone can kind of walk themselves through, or there are other examples sort of out there where folks are sort of productizing legal services, including things like templates, subscription based models, right, where you're charging someone a certain amount each month maybe, and they get a certain number of hours, or they get a certain level of services in return for that subscription. And then also value-based pricing, which speaks to pricing your services based upon the value that you're providing to your client, right? So that might look like basing how much you're charging someone in a negotiation, perhaps based upon the overall value that the client is going to see from that business deal, or whatever the case may be, right? So there are a lot of different ways to kind of think through what this looks like, but just generally in terms of what we're talking about, just talking about a fixed fee on the services at the end of the day. So the client knows what they're going to end up paying, and they know what they're getting for that, right? And so the potential benefits of fixed fee pricing, I think, cut both ways in terms of their benefits to clients. And then I think there are also benefits to us as attorneys, right? And so for clients, obviously, I think the major benefit is they get that price certainty, which I think can give you a huge advantage as an attorney, when someone gives you a call and you're able to say, okay, I will charge you X, and they go and they give someone else a call and they say, well, pay me this retainer, and as that is depleted, we'll come back and we'll let you know if we need you to pay more, right? So that price certainty for clients, and for us as attorneys, right, that means giving away a bit of certainty, taking on a little bit of risk. But again, I think it gives us an opportunity to sort of differentiate ourselves out in the marketplace. It also, as I mentioned before, aligns us with our clients' interests. There's an obvious benefit when you are, taking a fixed fee to provide a specific solution, to complete that solution or to provide that service in the quickest manner possible, right? And that's the same thing that the client's going to want. They're going to want a solution as quickly as possible. And so everyone's interests are aligned in terms of moving things forward. And then for attorneys, there's a little bit more predictability for us as well. Part of that comes into play in terms of just what you need to do in order to properly set up a fixed fee model, which we'll talk about a little bit more in some of the slides that are ahead. But being able to say, again, as I kind of mentioned before, here is what you're going to be paying me, and here is exactly what I'm going to be providing you on the back end. And also being able to say, here are the things that I'm not going to do, right? Or if I'm going to do these things, it's going to, cost you X, right? So being able to have a little bit more predictability around what that looks like. And then also, when we talked about scalability, having some more room for growth, right? So when you're doing some of the things that you can do with fixed fee pricing, whether you look at a subscription service, maybe where you're offering access to services in exchange for a fee, you might not be providing that, if you're offering someone, 3 1-hour consultations a month, they might not use any of those consultations 1 month, right? And so instead, rather than selling your time, you're selling that access. And then over time, as you're doing some of the things, again, best practices that I'm going to mention on some of the upcoming slides, you give yourself some more room for growth because you're not tethered to the 24 hours that you have in a day, and that being the limitation in terms of what you can actually charge for. So I also want to address some of the, I guess, myths that are out there around fixed fee pricing, right? Because it is newer to attorneys, it's less familiar. Attorneys and just our industry, the legal profession, our industry doesn't have like a whole lot of data out there, just like available to look at and understand. Which, again, means that this is, there's some gray area here. There are some things that we have to figure out just kind of through trial and error. But some of these things are just complete myths, right? Fixed fee pricing can definitely be profitable. There are firms that are doing it. There are legal like legal support service organizations such as AltFee that are providing services to attorneys who are trying to build firms around fixed fee pricing models, right? So it's something that's profitable, but it has to be done right, and it has to be taken with the right approach. Otherwise, it's definitely something that can turn into a something that won't be profitable. Let's just put it that way. Also, that is too risky, right? And so, again, anytime you're talking about entering into business by yourself, anytime you're talking about doing something that is unfamiliar, right, there are risks that are associated with that. But there are also ways to manage that risk, and also ways to make sure that as you are figuring out what this looks like for your business, that you are taking risks that are appropriate, right? And then last but not least, that fixed fee pricing will attract the wrong clients. And this one is actually like couldn't be further from the truth. And I can speak from personal experience. One of the things about being able to say upfront to my client, upfront to potential clients, either when they reach out and give me a call, or even when it's just being able to put the price of my services on my website, is that folks know upfront, and they're able to self-select on whether or not they can afford my services, right? And so I actually got this. I put all of my pricing on my website. I designed my website, which is probably one of the reasons why like the pricing is on there, but it can be a little difficult for people to find because I'm not like a website designer or UX expert or anything like that. However, I got the idea behind this and putting my pricing on the website because it's something that lawyers typically don't do, from a story that I heard as it related to a company that installed pools for people, in-ground pools. And what they experienced was that a lot of folks would reach out and want someone to come out and do like a consultation and take a look in their backyard and show them the pool, what they had to offer, all of that. And then they would get to the end of that, consultation, and they would tell the person the price, and it was clear that whoever it was not ready to purchase an in-ground pool. And so what they started doing is putting the price directly on their website, making it very clear how much it would cost, and then folks would self-select. They weren't going to schedule that in-home consultation for an in-ground pool if they knew that when they got to the end of that consultation they wouldn't be ready to buy. And I think the same thing is true of our clients. Folks aren't going to want to waste your time or theirs talking with someone who at the end of the day they're not going to be able to work with, right? And so being very clear on what you offer and what the pricing is, can really help people self-select, saving your time and also theirs. And here are just some examples of either law firms or lawyer created services that are out there utilizing or building off of fixed fee pricing models and doing very well for themselves. So, like I said, there are plenty of myths, plenty of folks who will say, this sort of thing can't work. Um, but there are attorneys and firms out there who are proving that it does and that it can. So in terms of deciding whether or not fixed fee pricing is right for you, I think the biggest thing that you need to think about is what is your why? At the end of the day, again, this is a bigger picture thing, right? So how you determine or how you decide to design your law firm, whether it comes to pricing or branding or just whatever the case may be, it all gets back to, is it serving your why? Is it serving the purpose that you have at the center of why you're going out and why you're trying to start your firm and who you want to serve? And ultimately, will they find this to be something that's valuable to them? Because if it's going to be valuable to your customers, if it's going to be valuable to your clients, again, it's something that becomes a differentiating factor between you and the other attorneys who they might be looking to work with, right? So I think fixed fee or flat fee billing is going to end up working best for lawyers and law firms. Number one, that are looking to prioritize work-life balance. Again, I think when you're selling time, part of what goes on in your head, right, is that every 6 minutes, or let's say every hour, right? Every hour that you spend doing something that's not related to your firm or related to your business, it has a price tag on it, right? And so there's that constant pressure of, if I'm spending this time doing something else, I could be spending this time making, my $300 or $350 an hour fee if I had a client, right? And so there's that constant pressure there. And so in terms of being able to build a work-life balance, I think that some of the things that you're able to do when you get a little bit more creative with your pricing and also a little bit more creative in terms of the services and solutions that you're offering, is to build something that fits around the type of lifestyle that you want to live, right? So if having a lifestyle, if money isn't everything, or if for you it's about, yeah, I want to have a successful business, but I also want to have the time to go to my son or daughter's soccer game, or I also want to have the time to spend outside of the office on the weekend, or I also want to be able to just go on vacation for 2 weeks out of the country and not have to worry about what might be happening in terms of my firm. A firm that's built around a fixed fee pricing model is going to be a little bit more amenable to building something that fits around your lifestyle, whatever that looks like. Um, I also think that in particular, if you're working with everyday individuals, or you're trying to solve everyday legal problems, or if you just have a general interest in access to justice, I definitely think fixed fee pricing model is going to be more enticing to them, right? Typically, as consumers, we're used to, knowing what we're paying up front, knowing what we're getting on the back end. So it's a little difficult, for someone who's maybe not used to working with a lawyer, whether that's in a family law context or, consumer law context, or, someone who's trying to start their first business. Is I often use the analogy, like if you went to the mechanic and they were like, "Oh, well, give me, $800 and then come back in 2 weeks and I'll let you know whether or not your engine is fixed or whether or not you need to give me another $1,000 to finish it." Most people would say, all right, well, I'm going to go to the mechanic down the street, right? And so I think if you're working with an audience, again, that might not necessarily be working with lawyers all the time, or might not have a lawyer on retainer, definitely having a fixed fee pricing model is going to be more enticing to them. Also, if you're providing solutions that are highly process driven with relatively predictable outcomes, I think that would be a great situation in which to try out fixed fee pricing. I know for me, prior to starting my own firm, I was at a nonprofit doing criminal record clearing work. So that included pardons, expungements, and a lot of that was like, not, I won't say a formality, but the process was very similar for each case and each situation, right? So it was about, gathering the information that needed to be gathered in order to tell the story that needed to be told. And then at that point, a decision is going to be made, whether it's a judge or the Board of Pardons making that decision. But the processes and the steps stay the same, right? And so in that situation, it's very easy to predict how much time it's going to take at each step in that process. and therefore predict, what I want to charge for, kind of each step in order to kind of help guide people through those processes. And then also, again, I mentioned the ability to scale a little bit better when you are, selling outcomes or selling a particular product or a particular service, versus selling your time. So, are there any questions about any of this, thoughts, comments before I jump to do's and don'ts? I just want to kind of give an opportunity to, just see if anyone has anything.
Yeah, I'll just comment that I think fixed fee pricing is a excellent model, and Zane's laid it out the good reasons why. And I think there's some instances where it's not the right model, so you have to, you know, um, use your discernment and discretion. But I think it can and should be used in more cases, more instances than we as attorneys do. But there are some cases where the hourly billing model is the right thing to do. But I guess I would just encourage all of us to be open to the sort of flat fee, fixed fee pricing.
Yeah,
Hey Zane, I appreciate it, man. Like I've never heard of the flat fee before, so I appreciate you kind of giving us the heads up on it. And I'm looking at your website and I see how it's working for you. This makes a lot of good sense.
definitely, definitely. And I mean, as you it's helpful to know that this is like your first exposure to the idea of flat fee or fixed fee pricing. So as you kind of move into developing your own practice, if it's something that you're, looking to explore, definitely feel free to reach out and let me know what questions you have, because I know that right now, in terms of just like introducing the concept, your head might just kind of be like, well, how does this kind of work, or how does this fit, or what does this kind of look like? But so yeah, there might not be questions right now, but if anything does pop up later, feel free to let me
Yeah.
know.
Chris
um,
Stone's got a chat question in the chat. How do you handle refund requests? And I don't know if you get to the do's and don'ts, maybe I'm quoting. It's a
Yeah.
China's payment.
So that's a really good question. I don't get refund requests too often. When I do, I typically honor them. But what I and this will kind of be talked about more in the do's and don'ts. But when you're doing fixed fee pricing, it's really, really important to set like a detailed like scope of what you're doing. So basically like a scope of work of like, here's what it includes, here's what it doesn't include. Also being able to say, like, you are paying for this particular service, right? So for example, with my like, I work with entrepreneurs. I offer LLC startup packages where I kind of like package a bundle of services as well as setting up someone's LLC. And part of that will be having the option to schedule a follow up consultation within 6 months, or having the option to schedule a contract or document review within 6 months. And I make it very clear that you're paying for the option to do that. So if you don't use it within those 6 months, you can't come back and ask me for, a refund because you didn't use it, because it was part of this entire package, right? And then the other part too, and I think most, in Pennsylvania at least, I think it was the Philadelphia Bar Association came out with like a piece of guidance where they said if you're doing flat fees, it shouldn't be refundable. Like, none of the flat fees that you take should be refundable. Personally, I don't agree with that opinion, and I don't think that it's the best like customer service approach to things. And I mean, I'm no expert when it comes to legal ethics, but the idea that, um because and I if I can find the opinion, I'll send it to you, Mark, so you can share it. But I think the idea that, in order to be able to charge someone for a flat fee, you have to tell them that they can't get a refund for that, because otherwise it would somehow make the money that you took like means that it belonged to them the whole time. Like I don't really agree with it in principle, or just from like a legal standpoint. So I personally, I don't follow that. But that is one thing that you can do as well, is just say, and I do say in my engagement agreements, that generally speaking, refund requests won't be honored, that what you're paying is a non-refundable, fee. And you also, and this is on the last slide, but from an ethical standpoint, you do have to make it clear how you're handling those funds as it relates to whether or not it's going into a trust fund, a client trust fund, or whether or not it's going directly into your operating account, which I'll talk a little bit more about that
Yeah,
later.
just real quick, in North Carolina, yeah, there's an ethics opinion that I don't know it off the top of my head, but it gives very clear guidance on how to handle flat fees, and it's earned upon receipt. So you've earned the
Yeah.
fee upon receipt of the fee, but there's very specific text that they want included in your engagement letter. So it's helpful that they at least they give you the language that you know that you're covered. And the good news is it's earned upon receipt, so it can go right into your operating account and not, at least in North Carolina. Now in Ohio, Chris, I think you're in Ohio, but yeah, just I would encourage you to. I'm sure there's an ethics opinion, or the state bar has some guidance on it for Ohio.
Yeah. Yeah. Every state is different. Pennsylvania is like North Carolina, where you have to have very specific language around, earned upon receipt, and, letting people know it's not going into a, IOLTA account. Um, and but I know in New Jersey, I think New Jersey, for example, like it still has to go into a trust account. So every state is different. And then in terms of when quoting a flat fee, is it done as payments towards the full fee with a balance paid before the work done, or do you quote the fee and work toward it? So it depends on the service. Basically what I do is, and I think like the best example would be if I'm drafting a contract. If I'm drafting a contract, I will typically treat that as, I'll get paid half up front, paid half upon delivery. And basically the way I'll term it in my engagement agreement is that you're paying me that half up front to begin the work, right? So you're paying me to start doing the work, and that's what I'm getting paid for. It's earned upon receipt, non-refundable, so on and so forth. And then the second half, that second payment is, you are paying me to, basically, oh shoot, you're paying me to, um, deliver the finished product, right? So you're paying me for delivery of that finished product. So that's pretty much how I word it. Again, every state is different in terms of what they require, and guidance has been provided. And this is still an area where things are sort of coming together. But yeah. So one, I wanted to tell a quick story before I hopped into the do's and don'ts, because um, like I said before, putting together or building a practice around a fixed fee pricing model, is there's some trial and error involved in it, right? Because as I said, there's no data, there's no blueprint that's kind of just out there in most cases. There are some areas where, there is a blueprint, and where there are companies that offer coaching and other services that kind of provide a blueprint. I think like Wealth Counsel maybe might be one of them, or there are others for like trademark lawyers and that sort of thing. But so, for me, I didn't have any sort of blueprint. And, so the first client who I ever took, I was surprised when a couple years later that client reached out to me, in part surprised because it had been a few years, also because they had never paid me, not 1 cent for any of the work that I had done. And that was like I said, the first client I took them as a fixed fee client. And I made a lot of mistakes. And I've made more mistakes along the way. No mistakes as big as that one, fortunately. Um, but so I put together some do's and don'ts to help you avoid. I don't think any of you would make the mistake that I made that ended up in me not getting paid at all. Because I pretty much just said, okay, I'll do the work. You don't have to pay me anything up front, and we'll kind of worry about that later. I think just being a little too eager. Um, but I think following these do's and don'ts is going to help you kind of get off to a good start if you're thinking about fixed fee pricing for your firm. So First, think about your pricing to the best of your ability in terms of value, right? In terms of the value that you're providing to your client. I think even, as you try to move away from the billable hour, even a fixed fee pricing model where you're saying, okay, I'm going to determine my price based upon it takes me 5 hours to do this type of work. I want to get paid $300 an hour for my work, so I'm going to charge $1,500 for this, right? I think even that type of thinking, again, in terms of some of the benefits that we can get out of fixed fee pricing, whether it be scalability or whether it be just well-being, kind of moving away from that, like, how much is my time really worth type of mindset. Being able to think through what's the real value that I'm delivering to my clients, and how do I price my service, and then make it clear to them what the value is, and so they understand here's the true value of what I'm providing, outside of just this sort of understanding of how much time is this going to take, right? um so for example, well, I don't want to give too many examples because we don't have a whole bunch of time left, so I'll skip that example because I have some other ones that I think are more helpful. But try your best, I think, as you're thinking through what should my pricing be, to base that pricing based upon the value that you're giving your client, because I do think ultimately that will allow you to kind of uncouple the work that you're doing from the amount of time that it takes, and even sort of increase what you're able to make or what you're able to bring in, for each hour that you spend completing a job or doing some form of work on behalf of a client. Second, don't set your prices and sort of just forget about them. Fixed fee pricing, it's iterative, and really everything in business is iterative, right? Any new process that you're in the development of putting together. But when it comes to pricing, you want to set that price, set some systems that allow you to kind of bring in data that allow you to analyze that data, and then take the time to analyze that data, and then look at, okay, what is it at the end of the day that's working, what isn't working, and adjust, and then continue to kind of work that same process as you go, right? So you want to be able to measure certain KPIs, like, what is my, what percentage of clients that book a consultation, potential clients that book a consultation, what percentage of them are actually deciding to sign on for services, right? If I adjust the price up a few $100s or down a few $100s, does that change? How often are folks reaching out to me? If I change the pricing on my website, do they reach out more or less frequently, right? So there are a lot of different KPIs that you might be looking at depending upon the process that and that customer journey, kind of how people are finding you, and what that process looks like to get them onboarded. And you also want to look at things like, what in terms of the fees that you're billing, what percentage of the fees that you're billing are you actually collecting, right? Because that can also be a good key performance indicator of whether or not your prices are set at the right level, right? So you want to be, you want to set something, but you also want to kind of constantly be in that kind of testing phase of, is this going to be the right price for this service moving forward? And that gets to the next one. Again, it's an iterative process, right? So you are putting it out there, you're seeing how it works, you are adjusting based on how things work, and then you're kind of running that cycle again. And the only way to do that sort of thing accurately is by tracking data, right? So you want to be able to collect data on, again, how many folks are scheduling consultations, how many of those consultations turn into paying clients, how much of what you bill are you ultimately able to collect, do you have a lot of delinquent accounts, that sort of thing. All of those different key performance indicators are going to help you to make decisions that are accurate, right? If you're making those decisions without the data, there's no way to know whether or not you're making decisions that are accurate. There's no way to know whether or not some of the assumptions that you have are incorrect, right? So you want to be tracking data, and you want to make sure that the data that you're collecting is going to be helpful to you in sort of making those decisions. This is another big don't. Don't negotiate your price once you set it with individual clients. And this isn't a problem for everyone, but I know it was definitely a problem for me. And the reason why, right, is it if you spend all this time thinking through how you want to price your services, setting up a system to kind of collect and review the data that you're getting and make decisions based on that moving forward. If you're constantly negotiating your price with, and willing to negotiate your price with anyone who kind of comes through the door, it's hard to get data that's going to be accurate. But you're also, selling yourself short in terms of what you ultimately thought the value was of what you were offering, right? If you set a price, it's because you felt like I'm offering something that is worth that. And so when you are willing to negotiate your price, you're sending the signal that both to yourself and to potential clients that whatever my price is, I don't think that what I'm offering is actually worth that, right? So don't negotiate your price. It's a bad habit. Again, one that at times I've had issues with, but for some it might not be as big a problem as others, right? But don't be afraid to tell people, hey, this is my price. And if it doesn't work for you, there's another lawyer on Google or around the corner, or wherever you may find your lawyer these days. Another very important one is you want to manage your scope of work. I mentioned this before, but when you are the biggest thing that you want to avoid is what's called scope creep. And this is where you offer a service for a certain price, you get into doing the work, and then you either realize that they need something else that maybe you didn't identify at the outset, or they come back to you and they say, hey, I think I also need this, or do you think you could, do X, Y, and Z really quick? And it's very important, again, to set a very kind of detailed or at least just comprehensive scope of work, one that includes both what you will be doing, and it's helpful to kind of lay out the process of what that looks like so you can show here's what this includes. And then also if there are things that someone might typically think would come along with that type of service, being clear what it's not going to include, right? So for me, one of those things is going to be if I'm setting up an LLC for someone, I'm going to file the paperwork with the state to set it up, and I'm going to get your EIN number. But I am not going to, set up any business tax accounts, or I am not going to get your commercial activity license, right? If these are things that I'm not providing, I want to be very clear, because someone might come back to me and say, "Oh, well, are you also going to get my commercial activity license?" And it's a lot easier to have that conversation and say no if you can point to the excuse me, if you can point to the place in the engagement agreement where it says, here is exactly what's included and here's not what's included. And so if you'd like me to do that, I will charge you an extra X, or I actually don't do that, but here's a service, or here's someone who can help you with that, right? So managing your scope of work and being very clear in terms of writing that down and including it in your engagement agreement is going to be very helpful when those conversations do come up. It's just about setting expectations so that you can clear those expectations down the line.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick, and if you notice what Zane said in his scope, he said, I'll prepare the application or I'll file the application. He never promised that he would get approval. And that seems like a small thing, but that's a huge deal. You're not promising, particularly like with the LLC formation or a lot of things that we do, we can't promise any outcome, but we'll say, we'll submit the permit, we'll file the application, we'll do the paperwork, but it's, we don't decide whether it gets approved or not. So that's an important distinction when you important consideration when you write your scope of services, of saying what you can do, what's in your control, what's not in your control. And the other thing, exactly what Zane's saying, I'll just emphasize, is like say how many meetings you'll attend, say how many times, are you going to do an infinite number of drafts and revisions? Well, no. I mean, that would be scope creep. You'd say, we'll provide you a draft, we'll revise that draft based on your comments, and then we're done. So define what it is exactly, Zane's point. We'll attend 2 meetings, we'll submit a draft, we'll revise the draft once. And so it's that sort of language that helps limit your scope, and so that you don't fall into that trap of scope creep.
Yeah, that's actually a great example, Mark, like the drafts, because that's one of the things where, if you aren't clear about, here's the number of drafts or here's the number of meetings, someone might say, well, hey, it's not done. I, need more revisions to this. And you're kind of left saying, well, I promised to draft this, but I didn't expect it to take this many revisions. Do I tell them no, it's going to cost extra and risk, having an upset client, or do I just do it and bite my tongue and hope that this is going to be the last revision and that I won't have to deal with it anymore? But setting that scope of work and making it clear, like makes it so easy to deal with those sorts of situations. And then, I also want to encourage, and I think that this is one that even attorneys who do flat fee pricing don't follow that often, but don't hide your pricing. Again, I think one of the benefits of uh, moving to a flat fee pricing model is that price certainty that clients get, right? They know whether or not you fit within their budget, or if you don't at this point in time, they know where they have to get to in order to be able to work with you, right? So if you have set your prices, you've taken the time, like, that like the value that I'm providing is it either matches or exceeds what I'm charging for this service, then put it out there, right? Don't be afraid. Again, don't feel like it's like boxing you in because you're not trying to negotiate your pricing anyway, right? I do think that there are attorney ethics rules that I think kind of play a role in this, right? Where, like, I think at times attorneys want to have the flexibility to charge a little bit more for something, based upon, I mean, and I'll be honest, sometimes, like, we all do this, but you get the facts of a situation and you say, okay, this is going to take me a little bit more time. Maybe the other side sounds very disagreeable, so I'm going to tack on a little bit extra on this one. Or maybe the client sounds disagreeable, and so I'm going to charge them a little bit more because I get the sense that it's going to take me a little bit more time, right? But even in situations like that where you feel like you want to have the option to charge a little bit more, you can put, it starts at 1200, or it starts at 2500, and the price goes up from there, right? So you can build that flexibility into the pricing model, while still being transparent about your pricing, and being able to recognize the benefits that can bring in terms of really being someone who's different out there, in terms of what you're offering. So as I mentioned, I just want to kind of end by looking over some of the important ethical considerations, right? So we talked about scope of work, and making sure that you have a detailed scope of work. That's going to be important to you from a business standpoint, but also it has to be a reasonable limitation on the scope of work, right? So I quoted or kind of referenced the ABA model rules here because we're obviously in different states. But every state has kind of like an analog to this rule, right? So your limitation on the scope has to be reasonable, and your client has to give you informed consent, right? So they have to understand how the scope is limited, and especially in situations where there are going to be parts of the process, or like where I guess I'll put it this way, where that the client has a certain end goal that is going to require other steps that you aren't being hired to handle. It's very important to kind of either make it clear to the client that, like, here are the other steps that you're going to need to do, or figure out, or to figure out, are those steps not going to be necessary in this situation, or whatever the case may be. But you need to make sure that you have that informed consent from the client that I'm only providing these services. I'm only helping with these steps of the process. So understand that when it comes to these other steps, you will have to either handle those on your own or find help elsewhere, right? um and I think it can also be helpful to have a conversation around that with the client of what does that look like, right? So that they're, again, you're setting those proper expectations so that when it gets there, no one's upset at you because you've already gone through and told them, here's what you can expect, right? um and then also knowing the rules in your state regarding the treatment of upfront payments. As I mentioned, some states, and as Mark mentioned too, some states, such as sounds like North Carolina, Pennsylvania, will allow you to collect a flat fee upfront, and treat it as fees that are earned upon receipt, right? So they're earned at the moment that the client gives them to you, based upon you either beginning certain services or agreeing to provide the option to for a client to schedule or utilize certain services, right? But other states do require you to place these funds in an IOLTA account until the work is complete. And so make sure that you're aware in your state what the rule is, and follow that rule to a T, in terms of being able to make sure you avoid any ethical issues. So that's it. And I don't know if anyone has any questions or not. But I'm curious, what does I know Jared already mentioned that he wasn't familiar with flat fee pricing. Had anyone else heard of the concept or encountered it anywhere else prior to today?
I had heard of it. Has been something that I've kind of been curious about because just with the way my brain works, I sometimes work way more quickly, sometimes work much slower, generating a very similar, outcome work product. Um,
Mhm.
and I've had a few people mention to me that they don't deal with billable hours and they, have structured this. So, yeah, this has been really helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, I was going to say we might have some time later this afternoon, but in the e-notebook that I sent out, there's I think I showed you the pricing toolkit that uh, helps with
Yes.
this, and also there's I've got the North Carolina ethics opinion in there, and also Gravity Subscription, but that's the name of the firm that they promote subscription pricing. And so there's some resources in the notebook that you all received to help with this. And yeah, I'm a big fan of flat fee. So I posted Zane's website, mza.legal, that where you can see how he does it. Also, you can just see he's got, I think, a nice website. He uses Lawmatics. Did Lawmatics help with your website or?
No, they did not help with my website. Outside of just like the forms that I can create, I can then embed them in my website. So that piece, but they don't help with like the building or anything like
Gotcha. Okay. But yeah, so I encourage everybody just to check out different attorneys' websites. But Zane's, I think, has got a nice website and he's got his pricing there. My website, atkinson.legal, I post, and my pricing is different because my why is different than, Zane talked about what's your why, but I post what I try to get into subscription pricing. I'm not always successful, but I try to get in subscription pricing where, like for a larger nonprofit, I say, I'm going to charge you $350 or $325 a month, and you've got access to a couple hours of my time, and that's how it works. Um, um, oh, and the other thing, just to reiterate what Zane is saying, I want to talk about the value pricing. For the example of an LLC formation, say I'm making this up. I don't know if it costs less or costs more than that, but you say the value of that is $1,500. You bill the client $1,500 and you help them set up their LLC. Well, the first time you do that, it may take you 10 hours to do it. So your effective billing rate is $150 an hour. After doing it multiple times, you get more efficient, and maybe, just for simplicity, maybe it eventually takes you only 3 hours to do. So then your effective billing rate is $500 an hour. So you're a lot more efficient, but the value to the client is still $1,500. But what took you 10 hours before is now taking you 3 hours. So you can reap the benefit of that through higher profits, or depending on what your business model is and what you're trying to do, you could adjust your pricing and now it's $1,200. Or you can do it thoughtfully, but that goes back to what Zane's saying. You got to know the value, you got to know your why, who your clients that you're serving, and you got to know how much it's taking you to do it, how many hours it's taking you to do it, and set up the processes so you do get more efficient as you do it. And you can make those business decisions based on your why.
Definitely.
Well, thanks, Zane. This was good. Yeah, so now you all know Zane as a contact. So I saw some chatting going on there. So that's one of the benefits of this program. You meet cool people like Zane.
I appreciate it, and I definitely, if anyone has any questions, anything I can be helpful with, definitely feel free to reach out. And best of luck to you all moving forward.